Because if I'm sitting here knowing, for example, that I typically need time to formulate my thoughts so that I can articulate them to you, then I probably should not try to force myself to do it in that moment. Because if I do that, I'm probably going to end up creating more chaos, more frustration, and then who knows, where that's going to go. Because I'm essentially working in a very unnatural way. I know that I don't tend to do that, and yet I'm trying to make myself do that. Not a good strategy. And I was thinking about, we all have different ways on how we're going to process these different experiences in real time, right? Sometimes it's very difficult, right? I kind of think of us in two different camps. Some people are very good at identifying how they're feeling in the moment, even if the emotions are very high. And some people need some time to reflect, to separate themselves, because maybe emotions are too high. And I'm so emotionally clouded in my thinking that I can't really formulate what I'm trying to say. It's very hard for me to articulate what I'm trying to say. And I think it's important that, sometimes when we are in these debates or discussions, that we understand how we choose to interpret these different scenarios, right? Because if I'm sitting here knowing, for example, that I typically need time to formulate my thoughts so that I can articulate them to you, then I probably should not try to force myself to do it in that moment. Because if I do that, I'm probably going to end up creating more chaos, more frustration, and then who knows, where that's going to go. Because I'm essentially working in a very unnatural way. I know that I don't tend to do that, and yet I'm trying to make myself do that. Not a good strategy. The same way, if you're good at it in the moment, it is a benefit to take a little more time, because you can essentially really cement and solidify how you feel. So it doesn't hurt you to take a little more time. It's just a benefit to you that you can identify it in that moment, right? But it's important to understand who you're dealing with. You might do it that way, but they might not. So you got to understand who you're talking to. And again, when I say who you're talking to, that's anybody. Insert anybody that you appreciate or you value. So it's important to understand that. And then when we're talking about beyond that, I think I always want to emphasize the point about our perspective and our bias, right? So when we identify an emotion, when it's us, when we're referring to us, right? Nobody can tell you how you feel. So what I'm about to say does not apply to you as the individual, because you know how you feel. And if you don't know, you can get some help to learn how to do that. But nobody's going to be able to tell you how you feel better than you. So we're going to make that the premise, right? But when it has to do with other people, we have to remember my bias is really, really strong. And it makes me think that because Carlos approached me in this way, that this is what I think he was trying to say. This is how I felt some level of hostility or tension or frustration or anger or whatever. But that's not necessarily accurate. That emotion that I think I see on him, I'm not allowed, in my opinion, this is my opinion now, I don't think I'm allowed to make that judgment or that assessment. I think I can observe and say, hey, there's some things going on that seems like he's quite frustrated right now, but I don't know why. And I need to be curious enough to ask, what's going on there? But what happens, I find, for a lot of us is we make that snap assessment an assumption.
Yeah.
This is how it looks to me. Therefore, he is reacting to me like this, so I'm going to meet him like this.
Right.
And that is not particularly helpful. That is not a great way to come to resolution. I want to make sure I do a good job of identifying how I feel, because nobody's going to tell you how you feel better than you. But when it comes to other people, we have to bake in some room that I could be misperceiving, or I could be looking at it in an incorrect way. And I need to simply ask, is this what you're trying to say? Is this how you intend for me to feel? Because this is how I'm experiencing it. And then see how they clarify.
And a lot of the time you realize that your assumption is most likely incorrect.
Right. Which is why we don't want to assume.
So you never want to assume. Really just get that clarity, ask those questions. It really is an amazing way to create those deeper conversations and have more productive conversations, especially when having those more challenging conversations about emotions or trauma or whatever it might be that requires a lot of our emotional tank and it requires a lot of our attention. It's going to make you feel a lot of feelings as well. It's important for us to gain that clarity so that everyone can benefit from the conversation. Otherwise, it's going to be one-sided or it's gonna escalate, and it's not gonna really lead to anything productive.
Very
Like,
important. Very important point.
that's really important to bring up. And I know Christina out here brings up, when I'm in a deep discussion and I'm passionate, I have a hard time articulating it, and at that moment later I am like, I should have said this or that. I think an important thing to bring up in the situations is time travel. So I think it's important for us to really bring up what time traveling is all about. So for example, if you're having a really tough conversation, first of all, let's move away from the idea that we should be perfect and knowing exactly what to say at every single time, always. That is not realistic. That is not helpful at all. That's not really gonna like serve you. So a lot of the time, like it's important for us to realize, hey, I'm not here to be perfect. I'm gonna respond in the best way that I think is appropriate for this moment. Maybe later on you do think back, because that's where I want to bring up time traveling, because I'm not saying that we shouldn't look back into our situations. Like, yeah, you should, and use it as a lesson. But it's not helpful for us to stay in there for 3 hours and like, oh my god, I should have said this, I should have said that, whatever amount of time, or like really just using all this time and energy that you could just be using now to create that change. It's important for us to use those moments and like kind of think to ourselves, okay, what would be a better way for me to tackle this? What is something that I could have said that would have been more helpful? Right. And then for the next time that conversation arises, then you're prepared because you already asked yourself those questions. But it's important for us to not just stay in that cycle where we're like, okay, this and that, and like looking for that perfect response every single time, because every single person that you speak to is different, and every single person that you speak to, that same response might not apply to them. So you might be practicing this exactly response for like, okay, this would have worked perfect for that person you had that conversation with, and then you try to bring that to the next person and it doesn't work, so you feel the same way, and it creates this cycle. You're like, I don't know, I tried this and it's not working, and it's not helpful. It's not really allowing us to like grow and just move on. Like really just allow us to move on, and move away from living in the past, and move away from like, time traveling. Because again, I think it's important when I say time traveling, I think it's important to dedicate time to, dive into the past and like really dive into those lessons that we can learn. And also time traveling is past and future. Taking that time to plan for the future, taking that time to, I don't like to say the word worry, but take the time to organize and plan for the future that we want to create. But it's not really helpful for us to live in all three at once at all times. Like, be present and then dedicate time for each. You can even schedule it, honestly.
No,
but does that make sense?
No, it totally does, man. And she was making another follow-up point, which I was going to touch on, building on what you said. When I was saying earlier about how sometimes we need that time to really collect our thoughts, right, and our emotions. To her point about a lot of times men, we just kind of want to rush through stuff because we don't have the experience, right? We don't have the skill. And I emphasize it's a skill to navigate these types of conversations. And I know because this is the clinical work that I do, right? So I know this about a lot of us, that this is an area that we struggle in. What I would say that is important, this is what I usually recommend to my clients, particularly the men. I think the best way not only to demonstrate a level of intention and understanding is to thoughtfully write out what you're trying to say before you try to engage in the conversation. Simply because, to everybody's point here, your point, her point, my point, if I'm in this moment and the feelings are high and passion is high, right? Things don't always get delivered in the best of ways. Versus when I'm calm in my mind and in my emotions, and it's easier for me to articulate what I want to say so you can actually understand where I'm coming from, right? We communicate to understand. We don't communicate just to share points of view. We communicate to understand one another. If I'm talking to you, Carlos, and you're saying, I don't follow, I have no idea what you're talking about, I'm doing a poor job of communicating to you because you need to be able to understand me. Otherwise, why the hell are we talking?
Just out here just waiting for me to be done so I can say something else to you. Like, it's not a conversation. That's not a conversation.
Or I'm formulating a retort. I'm formulating some type of feedback that I want to hit you with as soon as you stop talking. That's not listening and trying to truly understand, right? That's more of like a debate or possibly an argument waiting to brew up, right? So my point was, it's better for us to take that time, especially the men. Men, listen, for us to take the time write out and jot down what we think we're feeling. We may need to go back and visit it several times, okay, to make sure that, is this really what was bothering me? Is this really what I understand was the issue from what I heard? And I need to be able to express that to her, to him, to my child, to whoever, so we can all understand and be on the same page. If we don't have commonly agreed upon facts, right, you can't have productive dialogue.
Yep.
Because you see it this way, again, going back to the bias, you see it this way, I see it this way. We have to have a meeting of the minds, or nothing productive is going to come from that. And I am not, I don't work in the space to keep us fractured and we're both kind of doing our own thing. That doesn't help anybody. So I just wanted to really emphasize that point.